Hey, let's bring in my first guest now, New York Post columnist and author of the best-selling Biden family expose, Laptop from Hell, as well as The Big Guy, How a President and His Son Sold Out America. Miranda Devine, welcome to the program. I want to talk, first of all, about something that I spoke about in my editorial at the start of the show, about these claims that Anthony Bernal, the former chief of staff to Jill Biden, apparently, according to David Hogg, ran the White House during President Biden's term. Now, what do you make of this? I mean, we don't know exactly who was running the show when Joe Biden was president, but this does sound pretty damning.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James. Yes, Anthony Bernal is the diminutive gay factotum of Jill Biden, absolutely devoted, very loyal to both the Bidens. He's been with Jill Biden since Joe Biden was vice president, so over a decade. He dresses her, he glams her up. He plans overseas trips they take together on Air Force One during Joe Biden's presidency. And he and one other staffer were the only people who were allowed into the residence from the White House staff. They were the only ones who were allowed to see Joe Biden in the wild, as it were. And Jill Biden trusted her chief of staff, Anthony Bernal, implicitly with all the family secrets. I saw his relationship with her last year during Hunter Biden's trial in Delaware on gun charges. She was there every day, dressed to the nines with her entourage, which included Bernal, who was always at her side and at her beck and call. So he's made himself invaluable. And we now know from the Jake Tapper book and also from this Project Veritas video sort of leak from a couple of DNC operatives, Democratic operatives, that they regarded Bernal as probably the most powerful staffer because Jill Biden, as Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson say in their book, she was one of the most powerful first ladies in history. So that made her chief of staff, Bernal, into an incredibly powerful White House staffer and definitely responsible for protecting Joe Biden, covering up. There are ample videos. I wrote a column about him last year, actually, showing Bernal kind of edging in and catching Jill's eye when Joe was going off the rails. At one stage, he's in a Waffle House after his disastrous debate performance, and he's sort of looking completely bleary-eyed and out of it. And Jill and Anthony Bernal are sort of hovering around, and then you see them exchange a look, and Bernal raises both eyebrows in sort of shock, like we've got to do something. It's a very intimate kind of exchange of glances between these two people. I felt at the time that it was rather disloyal of a wife to exchange glances about the sort of mental state of her husband with someone who wasn't related, but that's how close they are.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like, we almost had sort of a Woodrow Wilson, Edith Wilson type of situation here, going back to the president of the last century, who was basically debilitated, and his wife ran the White House for the last years of his presidency. But there's also, Miranda, more questions also rising up about this constant use of an auto pen, which is a device where, you can use this to create the signature of the person in office while Joe Biden was in office. Tell us a bit more about this controversy, because there is some suggestion that this may have been used to sign legal instruments, pardons, that sort of thing by people unknown. And there's now apparently House Republicans who want to investigate this. Is there a conspiracy theory here? Is this for real? Could this bear fruit as a question of, the hand that had the auto pen was in charge of the country?
Well, look, a think tank has recently gone through all the signatures that they could find of Joe Biden's on executive orders, and most recently on the pardons that he pumped out in his final days, including for his entire family, and Hunter Biden going back 14 years. But and this think tank found that many of these signatures must have been done automatically by an auto pen because there were digital signatures that were so identical to each other. You know, an auto pen is just like having a rubber stamp. And considering we're now seeing that Joe Biden was not, I mean, it was obvious to us, but we're getting more stories that it was well known that he was non-compos mentis for not all the time, but for many hours during the day. There's a decent question to be raised. But the interesting thing is that the one signature that looks real is the one on Hunter Biden's pardon, because it's a very crabby sort of debilitated signature compared to Joe Biden's younger version signatures. So it does look like it was done by an old man who was rather feeble. But maybe it's like that because Hunter Biden was holding his father's hand. I mean, you just don't know what went on behind the scenes in those final days.
This is just the absolute shocking thing to me, that we just don't know who was running the country for 4 years when there were all sorts of disasters, the invasion of Ukraine, October 7th, and countless things at home that occurred on this guy's watch. But who knows who was in charge. But Miranda, before I let you go, I also want to ask you about this. Now, we know that a big reason why President Trump won the last election was his appeal to young men, young American men. Now, I absolutely love this here. There are now reports that the election loss has been so bad that they are now going to have Democrat Party staffers propose a multi-million-dollar project to speak with American men, a strategic plan for $20 million to study the syntax, language, and content that gains virality and attention. Miranda, why don't they just talk to the men in their campaign, or just simply are there not any men in the Democrat Party anymore?
There aren't really very many red-blooded men left in the Democratic Party. It's a very female-oriented party now. Women really dominate, and the men who are there are sort of frightened to speak up. You know, Kamala Harris went and chose Tim Waltz, the governor of Minnesota, who is not exactly a sterling specimen of red testosterone-fueled manhood, but he was seen by the Republicans as that. He talked about himself as being a real guy and you know, a real man, and because he supposedly knew how to hunt and shoot and fish and all of those manly pursuits. Although when he tried to do a campaign shtick out hunting with his shotgun, he didn't know how to load it. I mean, people who know about guns said the guy had no clue how to handle that firearm. So he was a bit of a fraud, and now he's out giving speeches saying, oh, that, you know, he knows he's important to the Democratic Party because he knows how to speak in code, to men. This is their problem. They actually are so out of touch now with what men, I mean, women, I mean, real people want. They just speak to this tiny little sliver of their very sort of extreme radical base that are out of touch. All they are about is cultural pursuits and gender and pronouns and climate change and things that most Americans couldn't care less about.
And that's why Tim Waltz's pronouns are now was, were. Miranda Devine, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate your time.